We got our team. Like I said, Mike Speigl will join soon, hopefully. So we'll wait on him when he comes. So, all right, guys, I want to get right into it. First of all, thanks all for making this because we literally pulled this together in 72 hours. Big topic, big panel. Very stacked with lots of industry leaders, dealers, people on all sides of the dealership side, the services side. We have Mike Stan, who's from NADA, the National Automobile Dealers Association. And shout out to Jake for the idea of putting this together because there's a lot going on and things are moving very quickly. And it's very, very helpful to get everyone together and, put together some thoughts, see how everyone's reacting to what's happening with tariffs and just all the changes, coming very, very quickly to the industry. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set up some context very briefly, introduce our panelists, and then we're gonna dive right in. We'll likely be going for about 55 minutes or so, roughly. And like I said, this will be recorded and uploaded to the CDG podcast for anyone that missed it, because I do know that, obviously busy day, last day of the month, and we have some great people that couldn't make it, but we'll do that. So with that said, we wanted just to kind of set the table for why we're here right now. So starting April 3rd, 25% tariff is hitting all imported vehicles. On May 3rd, 25% tariff is supposed to be hitting on critical auto parts as well. And so, we're industries right now facing some really significant change, probably the most significant potential change since COVID, really. If you look at the numbers, this would impact roughly half of all vehicles sold in the US because they're all imported. So there would be ripple effects here that hit, every player, all dealers, all consumers, really everyone in the industry. We did email Senator Marino, who couldn't make it. He had a meeting at this exact time, although he did send us some context, which is important to, kick off with, which is that there's really four categories that explain what is essentially happening with auto tariffs. And this is extremely important. I mean, I'll try to keep this as simple as possible, but basically you have category one, which is basically vehicles built in the US using North American parts that are USMCA compliant. There's no tariff on that. So if a vehicle is built in the US using North American parts, no tariffs. Category two, vehicles built in the US with non-North American parts. That's a 25% tariff on those parts. So that would be considered category two. Category three would be vehicles built in Canada or Mexico using non-US parts, where a full 25% tariff would apply. And lastly, there's a category four, which is simply vehicles built entirely outside the US with no American content. That's a flat 25% tariff on the entire vehicle. We'll discuss this, but that's to give like a very high level framework of what is happening and how this differs so much by OEM and by dealer, really. Depending on the brand, the supply chain, the customer base, it's going to be very, very different. Quick one-liners on every single panelist up here. Like I said, we really do have a stacked panel, so this should be a great conversation. In no particular order, we got Brett Morgan, CEO of Morgan Auto Group, one of the largest private dealer groups in the country. Michael Speigl is going to be joining us shortly. He's a dealer principal of WEAuto. They have a Toyota, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, Ford, and Subaru stores. Cliff Banks, he's publisher at the Banks Report. Cliff always writes extremely interesting, thoughtful analyses on what's happening in industry, and he wrote about this story, tariffs. He wrote a great deep dive with lots of analysis of what may happen. Highly recommend to check that out, and we'll discuss that as well. Jeremy Robb, Director of Economic or Industry Insights at Cox Automotive. He'll also help us with some, macro and some other data points of what may happen. Andy Wright. Andy is a dealer principal at VinArt. He runs German brands, Porsche, Mercedes, Japanese Honda, and Korean. He has Hyundai as well. So he's pretty well diversified there. Jake Leibowitz, partner at Raceway Auto Group. Lots of exposure to many different brands, but some things that, some highlights are Audi, Hyundai, Kia, Chevy, and Nissan. Brian Benstock, one of the largest Honda dealers in the world, Paragon Honda. He's got Honda and Acura. We got Alan Haig, president of Haig Partners. Haig Partners is a leading buy-sell advisor in auto retail. Alan speaks with lots of dealers daily. And we got Mike Stanton, president of the National Automobile Dealers Association, that is working throughout all this. So with that said, that's our panel, and I'll kick it right off. And my co-host, of course, the great Sam Dark from Ziegler Auto Group, Ziegler Automotive. He's here with me here as well. He also hosts our Industry Spotlight podcast at CDG. And so we'll be co-hosting this together. With that said, I'm going to just jump right into it. Cliff, I wanted to start with you. I think it's important to kind of, set a little framework here, talk about the macro before we get into the ground level. how dealers are adjusting. You initially shared the story about tariffs and you give a very detailed background. Can you just give us some of the highlights? What is really happening? How firm is this policy? Talk to us just a little bit about that, the White House motives, national security rationale, and everything to do with that. I scared him away, guys.
So should we go to Cox, Jeremy?
Let's do it.
Fantastic. So Jeremy, Rob from Cox Automotive. So thinking about the forecast, short term and long term, how do you see these tariffs impacting the industry, Jeremy?
Yeah, great question. We do a lot of scenario planning around that and trying to see how the impact. It's really hard to see any type of scenario where they're not inflationary for vehicle prices. So, we have the Manheim Vehicle Value Index. I write about that a lot. It has generally about a 2% lift every year in the index, whether you're looking at, seasonally adjusted values or non-seasonal adjusted values, because generally speaking, new cars have an inflationary component to them and they have risen in price. And we know over the last couple of years, those new cars are coming out at around $50,000 and they enter the vehicle pool. So even as those depreciate, they bring the average value of the pool up. Our outlook in February, prior to really knowing about a lot of these tariffs getting solidified, was that we thought the index would probably be up about 1.4% at the end of the year. We revised that. We shared it last week on our outlook. Our baseline now is about 2.1%. So that's up, 70 basis points from where we were, closer to the long-term average. But we think that could go up to almost 3%, depending on what happens in 2025, with more people really trading down from the new car side to the used car side. And then it gets a little trickier as you go out a couple years from there. There could be some slowdown in the economy overall, especially as we get into 2026 if these tariffs stick around by then. But that's going to be something that really we could see higher prices for a lot longer period of time. We're seeing that in our weekly data, seeing in the monthly data, and we don't think it's really going to go away anytime soon either.
Yeah, anecdotally, you're already starting to see it in the wholesale numbers at auction, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So, we measure that every week and we put out some, public information on it twice a month. When we saw the mid-month part in March, a week or two ago, we actually said, we thought we may have seen the peak already for prices. Totally normal for prices to go up at this time of year, really every week. And so we say when we see the peak, what we really meant was prices were still going up. They just weren't going up quite as quickly as we normally see them go up. And so what happened last week, we saw prices start re-accelerating on their growth levels just a little bit. So we're still below kind of the long-term average. But even though a few weeks ago where we said we thought they had peaked and come back, well, we saw them pick up a little bit more just last week in response to all this. So definitely some pricing increase in the wholesale markets right now too.
I think I want to, Brett, I want to push it to you. And I'm curious to know, given you have visibility into nearly every OEM across the country, two questions here, right? What were the first moves that you started making when this broke? And I know we've sort of had this staggered rollout of tariffs. First, it was like, oh, it's just a negotiation tactic. Then it's like, wait, this is really going to happen. Kind of several phases here. So as you're managing, dozens of stores across country, first moves when this news broke, and how are you really thinking about risk versus opportunity? Meaning, is this something that you can capitalize on? How are you navigating the ship in light of all this?
I think in the short term, this is something on consumers' minds, right? I think we looked at our call tracking, and 1/3 of incoming sales calls for the last 4 days has been tariff related. So that gives you a good idea of what the customer's appetite is as far as, where is this going? How effectual is it going to be? I think to tag on to what we were just talking about on the wholesale side, I mean, our kind of advisory over the weekend to our guys was if you've got aged inventory, instead of worried about the reserve as a part of our Morgan policy as it breaks 60 days, hold on to that inventory, take your bruise and your reserve because your replacement cost is going to be higher. So we're monitoring those wholesale prices, as much as we can. But I think that's kind of the immediate worry. The response from an OE perspective is varied, and I'm here as much to learn today as I am to talk about, what I know. But you've got brands like BMW who have communicated that, hey, look, we're in this together. We're going to participate with you. We're going to, share in these, increased expenses and try to mitigate the price increases as much as we can. You've got other brands like Subaru who said, we need to know more. We're closing the sold order bank until we have a better idea, a better grasp on where pricing is going. For Stellantis, it's really interesting because we have a large hold of Stellantis stores, and I'm on the National Dealer Council, and we have a pretty good grasp of what's made where. Naturally, you've got some HD, the heavy duty truck assembled in Mexico on the Ram side. That would be, I think, a concern. But again, until the manufacturers come out and actually tell us where they're pointing, it's probably not safe to assume, okay, well, Jeeps are assembled in the US, that, most of the Jeep product's going to be okay, because they may look to, offset some of these cost increase across the entire portfolio. So we're kind of playing a wait and see game on the news side. Surely we're benefiting in the short term. We had a really robust and healthy sales weekend. I'd say plus 20-25% of where we thought we'd be. But the reality of life is the immediate concerns, the wholesale market and the replacement costs on pre-owned.
Wow, that's fascinating. So 25% increase over the weekend, and you're saying tariffs on, you said 1/3 of all your calls?
1/3 of incoming sales calls. And I talked to, I had a ton of referrals over the weekend, and I'd say, about 50% of them were motivated in some way by these tariff discussions. So, there was a purchase, somewhere in their near future, but they, naturally kind of pushed it up to the top with with concerns over increased cost. Really fascinating.
Wow, that's fascinating data, Brett. I want to, Michael, I want to ask you a little bit about, you've got Toyota, Ford, CDJR, and Subaru. Have you had any conversations with OEMs? How are they going? What information have you gotten on that end?
Yeah, I'll echo what Brett said. We've had almost all of our OEMs reach out to us directly and asked for input, which I think is a great place to start. We want to feel like we're in partnership with our OEMs, and we really feel like right now they're in the data collection. I don't think they know what to think of where this is going to go. And to echo again what Brett said, we saw a number of customers come forward who either in pipeline, et cetera. But what was interesting, we saw a little more on our import side than we did on our domestic side, and specifically around some of the marketing. So we put out a message like everybody else did. Hey, now's the time. Tariffs are potentially going to raise the price of vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. And some of our domestic customers reached out to us almost offended that we would put that type of message out, as to where our import stores were as busy. We set single day records at both of our import stores that we've ever had before. So interesting times. I think it's a very fluid situation. From what I can tell, the manufacturers are scrambling to try to get good, solid information. Another thing that we're very concerned about is how does this, new normal impact not only our consumers, but our employees, as things just in general are getting a little more expensive, because that's really the future. And not to use California as the model, but California is already a place where gallon of milk is $8 and gas is $5 and all those sort of things. And people are making it, and people survive, but they don't survive on $16 an hour. As a lot of people, if you read a lot of, Wall Street stuff, the credit is all getting squeezed at the bottom. Anybody who makes 150,000 plus seems to be holding on okay. I mean, they're getting squeezed too, but they're holding on. But the people at the bottom are really struggling. Credit card delinquencies are at record highs. And so we're focused on, that consumer of ours, but also that employee of ours. And how do we take care of our employees and our consumers that are getting affected the most?
Hey, Michael, 2 questions there. So first of all, what did you specifically put out there for consumers? You mentioned putting some deals on your imports, which I find not surprising, but it's sort of a double-edged sword, because as Brett was mentioning, you're probably not going to be able to replace that inventory at the same cost. So kind of how are you balancing the incentive there between, moving the inventory, moving the metal, but also realizing that you're going to have a different replacement cost, which could hurt margins? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, what we instructed our team to do over the weekend specifically was work your deal like a normal deal with the exception of the trade. So if it's a new car, if it's a really rare model, that's always been worked a little differently. But if it's a Camry, a Tundra, an Outback, an F-150, absolutely the replacement cost might go up a little bit, but we might miss the consumer if we don't transact right now. So we certainly would. We didn't put a messaging out around we have certain incentives or deals. We just put an incentive or a messaging around how the price of all vehicles are more than likely going to rise over the next, week to 5 weeks, depending on how this all shakes out. And that drove a lot of people. And we just worked our deals as we would always work our deals, with the exception, like I said, of the trade. Trade, certainly the books have not caught up yet. It'll take at least 2 to 3 weeks for books to catch up. Trades are worth more money today than what any book is telling you.
Yeah, especially with potential used car pressure and just looking at the auctions last week, and we'll see how this week plays out. But prices have definitely been pushing up on used. Andy, I want to push to you because I know you have German luxury, you have some Japanese staples, Korean brands. One of the conversations you and I had, I think maybe like 2 weeks ago, was just about how your kind of highline German luxury brands were feeling some pressure and affordability. Things were just not moving as quickly. And I'm curious to know, where are you most vulnerable? Has anything shifted now because of the fact that, import brands like German luxury are going to be tariffed the most? Has that significantly changed your business or kind of customer traffic?
Yeah. So thanks, Yo. So, first and foremost, I want to echo some of the sentiments that were expressed by Brett and Michael and some of the other dealers on the call here. We're seeing very much the same thing in all of our stores. In reading the details over the weekend that were released by the White House, certainly Senator Moreno's comments about the 4 levels of different tariff application and whatnot. For us, our biggest exposure is definitely going to be with our highline brands, Mercedes-Benz and Porsche. Porsche in particular, because all of their vehicles are produced over in Europe and imported in the United States. Situation like that, really what it boils down to is Porsche really hasn't given us any guidance yet on what they're planning to do, like BMW has with respect to price protection and things like that, particularly in the short run. So really it's going to boil down to how much can they absorb here. And I think if you listen to Senator Moreno's comments last week, he was talking a lot about the manufacturers, the price increases that have been put in place the last couple of years coming out of the COVID market. How much of the tariff exposure can they absorb into the price increases that they've enacted the last couple of years to help mitigate the impact on the consumer? Granted, I guess a case could be made that, well, the Porsche client, they're gonna step up and pay it. The Land Rover client, they're gonna step up and pay it. I'm not so sure I'd be quick to jump to that conclusion necessarily. It's definitely going to have an impact on our European brands. I'm feeling a lot better, if you will, about brands like Honda and Acura, and even Hyundai, who, if you look at the statistics on Hyundai right now, they could have some exposure in the short run. But as this plant comes online in Georgia, they're producing more and more cars here domestically. I think that their standing, if you will, is going to improve. So talk about a fluid situation. I will say this, I think we're in for seeing a cash for clunkers type situation with respect to demand in the next 30 to maybe 60 days. And then I think we could see a period where it's akin to the chip shortage coming out of COVID, where we're seeing maybe less supply, higher transaction prices. And then it's just a matter of what the market will bear and what the consumer can bear. So buckle up. It's going to be an interesting couple months.
Yeah. By the way, if anyone else here as a speaker, if you have, questions throughout, just, feel free to unmute and ask. So Andy, as you're saying that, 2 things. Number one is we've had a lot of conversations about affordability.
Yeah.
Me and you. And it's hard to really understand, how much further can prices rise? We've sort of been in this 49,000 average price on a new car, or average transaction price on a new car for quite a while now. And it's kind of flirted up and down. Weeks of income required to buy a car has gone down.
Right.
But that doesn't factor in other living expenses as well. It's a little bit unclear how affordability shakes out. But I think that what you're saying here, when you say cash for clunkers, can you explain a little bit more what you mean by that and just what you think how that could impact the industry?
Yeah, I was just using that sort of to illustrate the type of demand that Brett alluded to, and we're seeing record daily sales rates, record lead generation, phone calls, all that type of stuff. Just there's going to be a mad rush of demand to take advantage of a situation before dynamics change dramatically. That's just sort of natural behavior on the part of the consumer, right? There was a sense that if they didn't take advantage of the cash for clunker certificates before they ran out, they'd be missing an opportunity. Well, the same is going to go for the ground stock that's sitting out there on dealer lots right now. Before, as I think Michael alluded to, the replacement cost goes up. That cost is incurred by the consumer. So I think, cash for clunkers type demand is what I was referencing there. With respect to affordability, though, Yossi, listen, we have an affordability issue and a challenge in our industry right now. This situation is certainly not going to help solve that problem. It's probably going to further exacerbate it. And we're going to have to work together with our manufacturer partners to try to figure out a way to address that challenge of affordability. And then on top of it, we have a used car market that is still woefully undersupplied. It's a bit of a double whammy for the consumer, and but dealers are resilient. We're, as retailers, we'll figure out a way to chart a course through this challenging period. But there's definitely some serious headwinds here that are going to have an adverse impact on the affordability challenge.
We're gonna move forward in a second to the 4 categories. I'm curious to know, and this will be open up to really any dealer here, about what you're most concerned about in terms of disruption to your operation. Obviously, category 4 is the most onerous, but I'm curious to know how you think about impact. I did want to step back. One question is, Andy, you mentioned speaking with the OEMs and especially the German luxury. What are they telling you right now when you're asking for guidance?
Yeah, in our case, with the brands I represent, they're very much taking a wait and see approach. There hasn't been any official guidance or direction given by any of the brands I represent yet. We still have obviously a couple days until the situation takes effect, and I think everybody's sort of holding out hope that a deal is going to be made here. But after listening to Senator Moreno at the end of last week, it certainly sounds like the administration is going to be moving forward with their plans, regardless of if a quote unquote deal is made regarding reciprocal tariffs, inclusive of VAT tax calculations and things like that. I think the industry is rapidly moving in the direction of, we need to plan for this, and we need to be prepared, because the world is going to change rather dramatically April 3rd.
Got it. Sam, I'll push it to you.
Yep. So thank you for that, Andy. So Jake Leibowitz, looking at your brands that you represent, you've got volume brand across several price points. How are you making inventory adjustments, or are you at this point, or how are you rethinking sales strategy as you look at these tariffs?
Well, I think that COVID taught us a lot about navigating uncertainty. COVID, I think, really taught dealers to navigate uncertainty and almost have a day trading type mentality to the way we operate, both on selling and retailing new cars, but also stepping up properly to consumers' trades. What we're focused on right now is we immediately took as much port stock as possible. What was interesting was a lot of dealers were really leaning out and trying to take less inventory due to higher yields. And now you kind of see these dealers rushing to take more inventory, which will, like Andy said, it'll have kind of a double reaction, and it will increase used car prices substantially, I believe. And we're really focused on being tactical, being nimble. And I think that the larger groups can kind of not send anything to the auction right now, number one. And I don't think many dealers have been sending cars to the auction, but to Brett's earlier point, the aged inventory we're taking a really close look at, and we're making sure that we're not wholesaling anything at the moment. I think it's like Andy said, it's very fluid. Things can change in real time, and we're trying not to. We need to make car deals. We want to step up on trades, especially lower market day movers. Those are where we're really going to be aggressive. And I think, it could really be good for the consumer right now, but future uncertainty clearly it's tough to navigate. And I think as dealers, we need to just take it day by day, communicate with our employees. I think as more information is out there, we can make better judgment calls. But I think we just need to stay ahead and take care of our customers.
And it is interesting, Jake, in moments like these, there's always the opportunity, and the opportunity is oftentimes in the agility, right? Even though I think a lot of times we felt like these tariffs were a little bit of a negotiating strategy, but now with them pending, that agility is important, Jake.
And it's definitely pushing consumers, down the funnel. I would say if you had people that were 90 to 120 days out. Now they're 1 to 2 days out. And that same customer is getting more for their trade. They're getting the same car deal right now in this point in time. It's a benefit to the consumer, but who knows how that'll play out over the coming 30 or 60 days.
No, Sam, nothing's actually, Brian, nothing's actually happened yet, right? I mean, the car where the prices have gone up, and I think this is a time to step on the pedal. I think we've got an increase in consumer demand. I think that creates incredible opportunities for us, and certainly we'd be remiss if we backed off our strategy of taking and making every deal possible. This is not the time to cherry pick deals. I think this is a great time to turn and earn. And most manufacturers would be well advised not to pass the tariffs on to their customers, which is the dealers. They've raised the price enough over the past couple of years. It's time for them to, navigate this and to spread it out across their global community and not to pass this on to the dealers. We have enough inflationary costs that we have to deal with. Interest rates are still high. Insurance costs have gone up. And so this is a good time for the dealers to take advantage of the increase in demand and for manufacturers to pump on the brakes and to resist the urge to just pass this on to the dealers.
So Brian, BMW, Yossi, broke that news, price protected its dealers through, I think it was May 1st. You're proposing other manufacturers do similar.
Well, Sam, that's leadership, right? I mean, again,
Yeah.
nothing's happened. None of us know what President Trump's end game is right now. A lot of the things we're seeing that are going on in multiple aspects of his administration, we at some level understand was necessary, right? The unmitigated spending that was going on, the waste that was going on, that these things need to be addressed. Everyone wants to go to heaven. Nobody wants to die. And it's the same thing here. We want the benefits of running a tighter ship, but we don't want any of some of the difficulties. Hey, when you talk to somebody about the average person about tariffs, they say, I'm against tariffs. Well, have you seen the Chinese manufacturers? How would you feel if all of a sudden all those manufacturers are here in the US? I've seen some of those products. They price dump. They don't have the same costs that our OEMs have. So I'm glad that there are restrictive tariffs on countries that don't play fair. And I think that's a good thing for us. I was in Kazakhstan and I saw $13,000 sedans that were pretty good sedans. And you sit there and scratch your head. How can they produce a car like that? Well, they don't have unions. They don't have benefits for their employees. They don't have livable wages for their employees. And so there's not free trade there. Many of the European competitors don't have the same tariffs that we have here. And again, perhaps that's above my pay grade, but I trust the administration is going to do what's best for us as automobile dealers and us as Americans. So, I'm taking a wait and see approach, and I'm going to do what I try and do every day of the week. Sell every car I can, all the time I can, every time I can.
Dealer perspective, agree 100% on that. There is opportunity in this time of change. So Mike, Brian, real quick, and then we'll turn it back to Yossi. Are you hearing, as the largest Honda store out there, are you hearing anything in particular from Honda regarding their approach?
Honda has not announced officially their approach, but we do have 95% plus of Honda's vehicles made in North America. 73% specifically are made in the United States of America. So if there is an impact, I'm hoping that impact will be minimal for our manufacturer. And minimal doesn't mean it won't be there. Of course, there'll be an impact, but I'm hoping our manufacturer will come out of this better than the other manufacturers. Again, Honda's business has been very strong. It continues to be strong, tight, and hope that the price increases don't hit us anytime soon.
What are you doing tactically in your stores, or are you doing anything at this point? I have to imagine, you're doing something. What can you tell us about that?
Certainly, a couple of gentlemen have already spoken. We're reducing the amount of cars that are going to the auction. We're retailing everything that we can, and that wasn't always the case. We would try and specify and look for retailable cars and keyed specifically on Hondas and Acuras. We're keeping some of those other non-Hondas that we would have sent to the auction. In addition to that, certainly we were buying all the inventory that we could for the past 2 months from the OEM. We've got a pretty good day's supply. We believe in turn and earn. I think all three of our stores have done a pretty good job. So our incoming cars that hopefully won't be impacted by the tariff puts us in a pretty good position to go forward with hopefully pre-priced cars. And I think the OEMs can take a look at their builds, right? During COVID, they started producing a lot of those higher priced cars. I think maybe there's a time to look at some of the entry level lines that we do have and that we do offer, and maybe to shift production there, should that be what the demand requires. Right now, consumer demand is still pretty healthy for our mid and upper level trim levels. So right now, Yoshi, we're going to continue to churn and earn everything that we can.
Andy, did you have anything to say there?
No, I was just gonna echo Brian's sentiments. I think that this is going to be definitely a situation that compels the manufacturers to look at their trim level production mix and so on and so forth in an effort to respond to market conditions and customer demand. So still a big void at the bottom of the market.
Hey, Andy, a lot of these manufacturers got out of the incentive game, and
Yeah.
after COVID. Now, leave the EVs aside, right? They're all screaming, "Oh, we've
Sure.
never spent more." Well, that's because of that EV debacle. But on the regular brands, they got out of that business, and maybe it's a time to take a look at that before we go to raising prices to consumers, to maybe take a look at a balanced approach to incentives to keep the price to consumers at a level that'll keep our showrooms busy and keep the factories open.
So Brian,
Well
you're basically saying this could end up being like a forcing function in disguise to help the manufacturers simply be more efficient and cut the waste out of the system so they can focus on what's actually working. In theory, this could help push that using the tariffs.
forced efficiency.
I like it. I want to flip over. Let's go to Washington D.C. a little bit. We've talked a lot about in store. Mike Stanton, like I said, Mike is the president of NADA. You've got a pulse on 16,000 plus dealers nationwide. What's the temperature from your seat? What's NADA's stance on how this is being rolled out? What can you tell us?
Oh, thanks for having me. Our stance has been kind of a wait and see, control what you can control. It's great to hear from all the dealers on the phone, consistent with what I've been hearing. We had a huge weekend. We entered the year with a lot of optimism, some momentum at our backs, in that we beat the FTC. I mean, look, we were in an environment where our government through the FTC was going to tell us how to sell cars, and then we had all the Biden EV mandates. So we're moving from beating the FTC, and we are on a good path to knock out these EV mandates and the ACC waivers. Things were going great, until they were not. And as you know, we're the voice of the dealers here in Washington. Thank you all. Get 91% of the dealers are members of NADA. And since Trump was elected back in November, our day job, we're doing our day job. We met with the transition teams. We met with the White House staff. We've met with the U.S. Trade Representative, of course, congressional leadership, members, staff, Treasury, the SBA, and others. And our message on tariffs has been just the ongoing concern with affordability. Now almost $50,000 a vehicle, almost $800 per month on average. And as we've discussed, tariffs are likely going to have a negative impact on affordability, but also on small and medium-sized businesses, that represent our OEMs. So we've also talked about jobs, and depending on whose projections you believe to be true, we could keep talking about it, because a significant number of dealership, good jobs that dealers would have to make some tough decisions if the SAR is negatively impacted. So, but the bottom line to me is we need a lot more detail. We have to have continued engagement with the administration. We're meeting with all of our OEMs to get their perspective, get their plans. Each of them has their own, I would say, unique math problem that they've got to figure out. And hopefully they are listening to their dealers. We're certainly listening to them, so that this will continue. The momentum that we've got so far will continue into next year. And putting our customer first here.
Brian Benstock here. How about getting these interest rates down? These are certainly things that are affecting affordability for Americans, not just on the automobile side, but on everything that they spend money on. And certainly for us as automobile dealers, I've had a number of people tell me this is like 2019 all over again, and they're not taking into consideration that our floor plan rates in 2019 were 2.5%, 3%, and now those are 6.5%, 7%, and north of that for some dealers. So what about the pressure that we put on the administration to try and get those interest rates down?
Now, Brian, great point, and that's all part of the overall story we tell when we talk to all of our elected officials. Not just the value that you all bring to the communities, but the position you're in. floor plan interest, as you mentioned, rising insurance costs. All of that is part of the story we tell when we go to Washington.
Hey, Mike, how communicative has the administration been? I know they've been communicative in the sense of saying, hey, these tariffs are happening and like at a high level. And I know Senator Marino has tried to put out some more specifics out there. But as you're, working through these conversations, trying to get more detail, it seems like that is where the bottleneck is, right? OEMs don't want to lose market share. They've been very hesitant. It's kind of like a wait and see approach, which is a result of uncertainty and just kind of lack of clarity. So how communicative have they been, and where are you how are you trying to kind of unlock this next layer of information?
Yeah, so it's very easy to get meetings. In some cases, we've got the agencies calling in us asking questions, and we've been in a position of really more of an educational role than an advocacy role at this point. We deliberately wanted to give the administration some space, as Brian said before. Hopefully, they've got some of this worked out. They've got a longer term strategy that we're not aware of. I'd love to tell you that I have inside information. I do not. We just continue to show up and do our job, which is tell your all story, tell the potential impact that tariffs may have. And we've been deliberately, of course, we communicate with our directors and my colleagues in the states, and they share that hopefully with their dealer members. We've taken a very measured approach to this. We certainly don't want to be at odds with the administration. We need to work together to move our industry forward.
Got it. And then when you think about these conversations, which you said they're willing to take the meetings, it's unclear to me how productive those meetings are. What do you think is the ideal focus for you right now as you think about, all the dealerships across the country? And are we talking about potentially changing categories, right? So if a category 4 or category 3 of, as Senator Marino laid out, is a 25% tariff, or, are we looking at, hey, can we maybe make it so that if a vehicle is assembled in the US with USMCA compliant parts that does not get tariffed? Like, how are you thinking about potential tweaks to the current guidance the administration has laid out thus far? Or are you not even at that point yet?
We're not even close. As you would probably understand, that we're not being asked those type of questions. And this is where we have an opportunity to work with our OEM partners. And I do. I talk with the Alliance on a regular basis. And we also are very engaged with all of the car companies through the work we do with our dealer attitude survey. So we're talking to the right people, but it's just too early right now to figure out.
Yeah.
And Senator Moreno has been great. He's somebody that can be our voice, as well. But some of the things he said last week concern me. So I'll have to do a follow up with him. And again, keep talking. And the focus now needs to be on the details. I've heard from several dealers that the manufacturers, and even on this call today, they're not clear. Right? One of the manufacturers, they don't even know where to write the check. They don't even know where to send the money to pay for these tariffs.
Wow. Mike, I know you're with Alan Haig right now. And so, Alan, I want to ask you a different question here. One of the things I love about speaking with you is you always have a very strong pulse on the dealership, just market, M&A. And you were obviously, doing what you do during COVID when, things got shut down. And I'm curious, what are you seeing right now? I can only imagine you have a bunch of, deals in the pipeline right now, or through diligence or whatever. And what are you seeing? I mean, is this freezing M&A? Is this accelerating? Or, is this going to light a fire under groups looking to exit or expand? Is there any, again, it's still very early, but are you seeing any signals right now that you can share with us about kind of sentiment or pulse of the dealership M&A market?
The signal so far that buyers are going to continue to buy through this transition. I looked at our math. We have 16 transactions that we have under LOI or definitive purchase agreement for 34 stores. And some of those transactions are when we just signed a letter of intent or the APA in the last 2 weeks. So after there had been talk about tariffs, we're expecting bids on another 3 dealerships that we're selling this week. And I met with one of the bidders over the weekend who has basically just said, I'm buying these stores. Dealers have accumulated so much cash and they've made it through a variety of challenges in the past, most notably COVID, that I think there's a long-term perspective that when the right asset comes up in the right market, they want to own it. There may be some conversations we have in the future. If we realize, oh, Mazda's going to get hurt worse than average, somebody might want to come back and talk about the price of a Mazda store. On the other hand, if we think about this tariffs that are hitting our industry, they're hitting all industries across the United States, as far as I can tell. And so for suppliers to react, they're going to have to build factories in the United States. And we haven't really talked about what the after effect could be of this massive amount of construction that could be going on in our company. It's going to be a good thing for OEMs that manufacture heavy trucks, or trucks that are used by tradesmen. It's going to be a good thing for the few of you on this call that might be involved in the heavy duty truck industry. There are going to be some positive effects that happen over the next 6 months to 3 years. But in the near term, we've not had anybody call me and say, hey, Alan, we got to talk. I'm not going to follow through on the transaction I've been negotiating with you and your clients.
And are you seeing any concern on, the German import brands, or just like across the board?
It's a little too soon to know, is, and I think if I were a buyer today and I had submitted an offer, they all have a financial model that spit out the blue sky number they're willing to spend. They're running the calculus to say, okay, well, if my new vehicle sales drop by this, are they going to drop by what Cox said, which is 7%? Are they going to drop by what Bank of America said, which is more like 20%? And then what's the impact going to be on my used department? If vehicles cost more, my F&I numbers are going to go up because I'm going to be insuring and financing a higher purchase price. How am I going to react to my fixed operations? I'm going to keep more of my vehicles. We just heard that from several dealers. So my fixed operations are going to go up because I'm going to be reconditioning more of the cars. And then how am I going to price those cars? Will I be able to command a higher gross profit per used unit that I have in the past 6 months? And then will I have more of my customers coming back to me to repair vehicles versus trading them in? So there's, that's the beautiful thing about our industry is we've got 5 departments in almost every dealership, right? If you have a body shop in there. So I think that it's a little early for people to have run that math and figured out if new vehicle sales drop between 5 and 20%, what does that do to my bottom line? That I don't think anybody knows yet. And so far, the transactions that we've been involved in during this talk of COVID have not been killed or been altered in a way that I can see.
All right, so Brett, let's flip to you because you've been extremely acquisitive, and you're constantly buying stores. Does this make you want to lean in, take a pause, lean out? How do you feel about this?
That's a great question. No, I can appreciate a lot of what Alan has to say. I mean, I think that, timing, it kind of goes out the window if it's the right asset, and there were a couple of our transactions, both that Alan represented, Al Hendrickson Toyota and the South Vista, largely made up of some great BMW stores in South Florida, that when is the time right? Well, when you have the opportunity to acquire it. So, it's a really good question. I think there will be some inequity. I've been saying, for years, and I still feel this way, that there's just going to be winners and losers from a brand perspective as we move forward. A lot of my greater worries kind of along what Brian was saying. I'm just afraid that in an environment, here with tariffs, that we're just going to see a higher cost environment, and interest rates aren't likely to go anywhere in that environment. It's just, I think it's bad for consumers. And I think it's a little unrealistic to think you can reshape North American manufacturing in the scope of one term. Look, but having said that, there's going to be winners and losers here. Are those brands kind of already carved out in our mind? Potentially, yes. Are there going to be some surprises here? I hope not. But I think we're all waiting and seeing. I think the key here is how long are the tariffs going to be administered? I really think the key here, and I've heard a lot of people on this call who knew better than I say this is not going to be a short-term thing, and that is concerning to me.
Wouldn't it be great if a manufacturer made a substantive commitment to somehow get a pass on the tariffs while they're got shovel in the ground and making that commitment to manufacturing in the U.S.? Wouldn't that be a workaround? Is it a potential workaround? Many of the manufacturers already have that commitment. For those that would expand that commitment, could that not be a way around?
And I've had that thought too, Brian. I think that's a terrific point.
Yeah, because it's not likely the Porsche can do this overnight. And I've been trying to buy a Porsche 911 from Andy Wright for years now, and I can't get close. Just as I'm getting close.
The question was asked, what does the market dynamics look like for dealers when sales drop by 20%? Well, I think we know exactly what that looked like coming out of COVID back in the tail end of 2020 and for the majority of 2021. The difference, though, is this time around is that manufacturer production levels have not slowed down. In fact, they've accelerated. So ground stock is at pre-COVID levels right now. Now that should probably take care of itself here in terms of normalizing over the course of the next 30 days. So the question really becomes, how do our OEM friends balance production levels post implementation of a tariff to, in essence, get a better control over supply and demand, because that's ultimately going to dictate what happens. I mean, so many of us, the dealers that are on this call, back when COVID hit and they stopped producing vehicles and then the market started back up, we were selling cars. There weren't an abundance of product coming up from behind to replace the cars that we sold. So we had imbalance in supply and demand. And my concern is that we're going to end up with a ton of supply in a higher tariff environment. There's not going to be enough demand there to relieve that supply. And it's going to leave us holding the bag with much higher costs in the form of floor plan, in the form of incentives that we need to implement in order to move this product. So that's the big X factor that I'm looking at, and I'm sure that so many of my colleagues on this call are looking at.
That's great insight. I want to jump back now to also what Brett said, which is it's sort of been on my mind. It's kind of the elephant in the room, which is that you can't reshape North American manufacturing, in such a short time span. And Cliff, I want to push this to you.
Right.
But one of the things that I'm thinking about is, okay, not every vehicle has a one-to-one substitute or a similar substitute in the US, right? Something that's manufactured here, similar to an imported vehicle. How does this shake out, right? We can't just reshape manufacturing that quickly, right? Even if let's just say optimistically that we did it in 5 to 10 years, what happens in that time period in between, right? What's your prediction? I mean, what do you think happens from here?
Well, it depends on how long these tariffs last and how they are implemented, and we're still waiting for details, as everyone has mentioned. I look at least in the short term, you're seeing, I think, probably 20 models that are in that 30,000 or less category. So I guess you put them in that lower price category. 10 of those are imported 100% from overseas, including the Chevy brands. You've got the Equinox, Trax, some of the Blazers, several of the Toyota RAV4s, Ford Bronco Sport. So you look at those and you got to ask, are these long, if the tariffs last, are those models going to be around in a year or two? That's a legit question. I think on the plant side, you look at the capacity, which I think Wards has paid now across the board at about 65, 66% capacity. You really want those planes to be at 80% capacity, but I would say in a normal world, much of the undercapacity that we have in the US today is really focused on the EV side. So there's not a lot of wiggle room to move manufacturing of high volume products back into the US for some of our, at least some of the domestics. So then you start looking at plant building. How long does it take to put a new plant up? 3 to 4 years. Hyundai just opened unofficial. I mean, the first vehicle started rolling off the new plant, EV plant in Georgia in October. They started talking about that plant in January 2022. And I think started construction at some point later that spring. So you're looking at 3 years, really 2.5, 3 years for that plant. Chrysler is reopening the Belvedere plant, but that's not until 2027. 2-year play to reopen the shuttered plant. As everyone has said, I think we're still waiting for answers and to see how or what the details are of how this gets implemented. Certainly, I think what Senator Moreno's been saying with the 4 different categories, if that indeed is how it plays out, that's going to what the market looks like, as opposed to just a 25% across the board on every vehicle imported. I mean, if we break it out into the various levels based on parts, percentage of parts, and it becomes maybe a little bit easier to, for the manufacturers, it becomes more complicated, but maybe a little easier from a financial perspective.
Hey, no one's mentioned the other part that Senator Moreno mentioned and that President Trump mentioned, the tax write-off for purchasing a domestic car, being a way to blunt or to reduce the impact to consumers. I think that's a pretty good plan. I think that's a pretty good idea to get people back into the showrooms. What do you think?
Are you talking, Brian, about making the interest on loans tax deductible, kind of akin to mortgages?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, I am. And so a couple other things out there that people are just jumping over. What about eliminating the income tax for people making under $150,000 a year? I think that's another way to get people into the showroom to address the affordability. So I think when we look at these one-off ideas like tariffs in a as a standalone, we can say, oh no, it's going to have a terrible impact. But if we can take some of these proposals in combinations, assuming that the combinations happen, I think in aggregate they can be very good for the economy. I'd love to see people that are earning $150,000 or less have no income tax. I think that would be a great boom for our business, our country, our industry, and multiple industries. And who knows how that would affect us? But I know as a seller of cars like Hondas and Acuras, that would probably be a real break for our customers.
I would add to what Brian has said. So many of these calls and so many of these articles and everything you read is every reason why this isn't going to work and why this is the end of regular time as we know it, et cetera. But there's so many other levers that can and will be pulled. We've never had an administration with this type of business-friendly acumen or knowledge or experience. To think that they're just going to drive us right off an economic cliff, I think is maybe a little bit presumptuous. It just seems like there are a lot of other things that are going to play out between interest rates and taxes and all of the other things that can be adjusted over
$3 trillion, $3 trillion in foreign investment in this country. And how about not flushing $1 trillion a year down a sinkhole through USAID? These things, if that money is not going down the toilet, it can be reinvested in our country and in our consumers and in our businesses and in our infrastructure.
And Brian, what Trump is looking for here is he's looking for a negotiating win to bring this manufacturing back to the US. Your idea was fascinating, if I heard you right, which is OEMs could make commitments to bring production back to the US. And as long as they stay on timeline, this is a policy decision. Trump could come back and say, hey, this particular model is excluded pending progress towards that commitment, right? I mean,
I think the problem with
buy
that,
the land, make the commitment. And I think he did that in his first administration with Apple. Apple was going to build a plant someplace, and they committed several $100 million to building that plant in the U.S. And I don't think he waited to give them the tax credit they were looking for until after it was built. I think it was done when they made the commitment.
the challenge will be knowing what to ask for. What is the ask? And this is so new. Will it stick? Will it not? To Mike's point at NADA, what is that ask at this moment, right, Ben?
And keep in mind, there are some of those OEMs you can't trust, just saying.
I won't say that out loud.
the long-term issue with any sort of commitment for manufacturing in the United States is that that's a multi-term commitment that this administration can't make. So to Brian's earlier point, if you give them all of the tax benefits or all of the tariff freedom up front, potentially, but if you're going to say, well, build a plant, well, that could take 3 to 7 years, and 3 is probably not even realistic, which is then going to fall into, who knows, JD Vance's term, maybe a Trump third term, maybe Rahm Emanuel, maybe Kamala Harris, who knows?
Well said. Gents, I want to thank everyone for coming on.
Thank you.
We're going to clean this up. We're going to download it and upload it to the Car Dealership Guy podcast. So if anyone wants to send it out, share, it'll be live. If anyone has any closing thoughts, now is your time. Otherwise, I really want to thank, really strong, great panel. We'll do this again as, we get more information as it makes sense, but this has been incredibly insightful. And so thanks everyone for joining and for participating in under 72-hour notice, for just being very, very flexible. I want to thank you guys.
And thank you, Yossi. And just in my concluding thought is this industry is amazing because it has proven again and again and again how agile it is and how adaptable we are. And there's always opportunity in moments like this, and finding that opportunity and then learning how to deliver better for our customers, our employees, and everybody else is one of the big tasks of that, Yossi. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. This has been great.